April 19th, 1775, a small town called Lexington. In the morning mist, a handful of farmers stand their ground, armed with nothing but old muskets. In front of them stands the most powerful army on earth, the British Redcoats. To this day, nobody knows who fired the first shot, but history remembers it as that single shot gave birth to a new nation. A handful of rebellious farmers, merchants, and dreamers brought down an empire. If you're American, this story runs through your veins. And if you're not, this is still one of the greatest underdog stories in human history, a lesson in what courage and conviction can actually do. Today, we're going back to the moment when 13 small colonies stood up against the largest empire the world had ever seen. Stay until the end, because there's a twist coming that most people don't know: how a war that should have been unwinnable was won. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're covering one of the most important chapters in world history, the American War of Independence. This isn't just the story of how a country was born, it's the story of how an idea was born, the idea that people have the right to govern themselves. No taxation without representation, a single phrase that sparked a revolution. Let's find out how. By 1763, the French and Indian War had ended, and Britain had technically won. But the British treasury was nearly empty. To pay off this massive war debt, the British Parliament made a decision: the American colonies would now face a series of new taxes. The logic seemed simple to London. That war had protected the colonies, so shouldn't the colonies help pay for it? But to the colonists, it wasn't that simple at all. Their argument was straightforward. They had no representatives in the British Parliament, so Parliament had no right to tax them. This is where the famous slogan was born: no taxation without representation. The first major blow landed in 1765 with the Stamp Act. Suddenly, every piece of paper, newspapers, legal documents, even playing cards, required a tax stamp. The reaction was immediate and fierce. A secret organization called the *** Sons of Liberty * formed, and boycotts of British goods spread across the colonies. Under pressure, Parliament repealed the act the following year. But the damage was done. Colonists had discovered that if they stood together, they could actually push back against the British government. In 1767 came the Townshend Acts, new taxes on glass, paint, paper, and tea. Colonial resentment grew deeper. British troops were sent to Boston to maintain order, but their presence only raised tensions further. On March 5, 1770, a crowd of angry colonists surrounded a group of British soldiers in the streets of Boston, hurling snowballs and insults. In the chaos, the soldiers opened fire. 5 colonists were killed. History remembers this as the * Boston Massacre. Though the event was chaotic and largely unplanned, revolutionaries like Samuel Adams used it as powerful propaganda. Paul Revere's dramatic engraving of the event spread across the colonies, portraying it as a deliberate massacre of unarmed civilians. Then came that legendary night, December 16, 1773. The British government passed the Tea Act, granting the British East India Company a monopoly on tea sales in the colonies. Colonists saw this for what it was: another scheme to force them to accept taxation. That night, members of the Sons of Liberty, disguised as Mohawk Indians, boarded 3 ships in Boston Harbor and dumped over 340 chests of tea into the sea. This event became known as the ** Boston Tea Party **, a symbolic act of defiance directly challenging British authority. The British government responded with even harsher laws, which the colonists called the * Intolerable Acts. Boston Harbor was shut down, and Massachusetts lost much of its self-governance. There was no turning back now. In 1774, representatives from 12 of the 13 colonies, all except Georgia, gathered in Philadelphia for the first time to coordinate a unified response to British policy. At this point, they weren't yet talking about independence. They simply wanted their rights restored. But King George III saw this movement as outright rebellion, and he had no interest in compromise. Tensions exploded in April of 1775. British General Thomas Gage decided to destroy a cache of colonial weapons stored in Concord. But riders like Paul Revere and William Dawes galloped through the night to warn the colonists: the British are coming. At dawn, British troops and colonial militiamen, known as *** Minutemen **, ready to fight at a minute's notice, faced off on Lexington Green. To this day, no one knows for certain who fired first, but that single shot ignited the war. In Concord, the British met even stronger resistance, and on their retreat back to Boston, they were harassed relentlessly along the way. This day became known as Asterisk, the shot heard around the world, Asterisk, the moment that announced to the entire planet that the American Revolution had begun. 2 months later, near Boston, came the first major battle of the war. Though the colonial forces were technically defeated, they inflicted devastating casualties on the British. This battle proved something crucial. These amateur colonial soldiers were far from weak. Even the mightiest army on earth could be shaken by them. In 1775, the Second Continental Congress convened and made a historic decision. They appointed George Washington an experienced Virginia planter and military man, as commander-in-chief of the newly formed Continental Army. The choice was also strategically important. Keeping a major southern colony like Virginia firmly committed to the cause was essential. Washington's task was nearly impossible. He had to transform an undisciplined, poorly trained, and poorly supplied militia into a real army capable of standing up to one of the most disciplined military forces in the world. By 1776, it had become clear to many colonial leaders there was no room left for compromise. Thomas Paine's pamphlet, Common Sense, changed the minds of hundreds of thousands of ordinary people, making a plain, powerful case against monarchy. Thomas Jefferson was tasked with drafting a formal declaration. What he wrote wasn't just a list of grievances against British rule, it was an eternal declaration of human rights. That famous line, that all people are created equal, and that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are unalienable rights, still stands today as the foundation of democratic movements around the world. On July 4, 1776 the Continental Congress formally adopted the declaration. The 13 colonies were no longer subjects of the British Crown. They were now, at least on paper, a free and independent nation. Turning that declaration into reality would take 7 more years of brutal war. Almost immediately after independence was declared, things turned grim for the Continental Army. British General William Howe launched a massive assault on New York with an overwhelming force. Washington's army suffered defeat after defeat, retreating through New Jersey and into Pennsylvania. Morale collapsed, and desertions mounted. On Christmas night in 1776, Washington made a bold and desperate move. He led his troops across the icy, freezing Delaware River to launch a surprise attack on Hessian mercenary forces stationed at Trenton. The surprise assault was a resounding success. Days later, another victory followed at Princeton. These 2 small but crucial wins restored morale to the American cause at the exact moment everything seemed lost. In 1777, British General John Burgoyne devised a plan to split the colonies in 2 by advancing south from Canada through New York. But American forces surrounded his army at Saratoga and forced a full British surrender. This victory was the single greatest turning point of the entire war. It proved to the world that the Americans could genuinely defeat the British. When the news reached Europe, France decided to formally enter the war on the American side. Through Benjamin Franklin's diplomatic efforts, the Franco-American alliance was signed in 1778. The war was no longer just colonies versus empire, it had become a full-blown international conflict, drawing in France, Spain, and the Netherlands against Britain. During the brutal winter of 1777-78, Washington's army camped at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. This became one of the darkest chapters of the entire war. There was no food, no winter clothing, no proper shoes. Nearly 2,000 soldiers died from cold, disease, and starvation. But it was during this very winter that a Prussian military instructor, Baron von Steuben arrived and drilled real discipline and training into the Continental Army. The army that marched out of Valley Forge was no longer a disorganized militia. It had become a genuine, professional fighting force. After 1778, the British changed strategy, turning their focus to the southern colonies, where they believed loyalist support would be stronger. They captured Savannah and Charleston. But General Nathanael Greene along with guerrilla leader Francis Marion known as the Swamp Fox, waged a relentless campaign of resistance in the south that steadily wore down British General Charles Cornwallis's forces. Cornwallis eventually positioned his army at Yorktown, Virginia, expecting reinforcement and resupply by sea from the British Navy. But here came the most dramatic turning point of the entire war. The French Navy, under Admiral de Grasse, defeated the British fleet at the Battle of the Chesapeake, cutting off Cornwallis's escape by sea. He was now trapped, Washington and French General Rochambeau's combined forces closing in on land, and the French Navy blocking the water. After a 3-week siege on October 19, 1781 Cornwallis surrendered. Legend has it that as the British forces laid down their arms, their band played a tune called The World Turned Upside Down. And truly the world had. When news of the surrender reached London, Prime Minister Lord North reportedly said, "Oh God, it's all over." Although the war was effectively over after Yorktown, it took 2 more years to formally establish peace. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed, in which Britain formally recognized the United States as a fully independent, sovereign nation. So what does this war teach us? First, it shows that even when outnumbered and outgunned, unwavering conviction, patience, and smart alliances can overcome seemingly impossible odds. Second, it shows the power of leadership. A leader like George Washington, who kept his army together through defeat after defeat, can change the entire course of history. And most importantly, this war proves something profound. An idea, when powerful enough, can outlast even an empire. All men are created equal. That single sentence didn't just give birth to America. It went on to inspire democratic movements across the entire world for the centuries that followed. The American Revolution was a long, brutal, nearly 8-year struggle. Roughly 25,000 American soldiers lost their lives, but their sacrifice gave birth to a nation that would go on to reshape the course of world history for the next 2.5 centuries. So there you have it, the full story of the American War of Independence. How a small band of rebellious farmers and merchants stood up against the most powerful empire on earth, and against all odds won. What do you think? If France had never entered the war, would America have won its independence anyway? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into history's greatest stories. See you in the next one.